The CEOs of Facebook and Twitter testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee Tuesday. It marked the second hearing in just 2 months. Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey faced both questions and criticism from lawmakers about how they moderated content in the 2020 presidential election. Deborah Alfarone has more.
The CEOs of Facebook and Twitter defended their handling of election misinformation before the Senate Judiciary Committee Tuesday.
We introduced new policies to combat voter suppression and misinformation.
The public asked us to offer additional context to help make potentially misleading information more apparent. We did exactly that, applying labels to over 300,000 tweets.
Republicans allege the platforms have an anti-conservative bias. They questioned the social media giants' actions regarding the New York Post stories about President-elect Joe Biden's son Hunter in the lead-up to the election.
They decided that the New York Post articles about Hunter Biden needed to be flagged. That, to me, seems like you're the ultimate editor.
Democrats called out Twitter's flagging of President Trump's false tweets, including one claiming he won the election.
Do you believe that label goes far enough to prevent the tweet's harms?
I do, because it's not just the surface level label. It points to a collection of news articles, of information and conversation.
Some Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee echoed President Trump's unfounded claims of voting irregularities and fraud, and also criticized the social media company's policies.
It insinuates that anyone concerned about voter fraud must be crazy.
Both parties agree laws shielding the social media giants from legal responsibility for what users post on their platforms needs to be changed. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
For more, let's bring in Imran Ahmed. He is the CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Imran, thanks very much for being with us. A big focus of Tuesday's hearing was how Facebook and Twitter moderate content. Republicans argue the platforms are biased against conservatives. Meanwhile, Democrats argue neither platform has gone far enough. How did the CEOs respond to those allegations?
Well, good evening. This was a disconnected hearing in which every side had their own pet peeve, their own pet irritation with Facebook and Twitter. But one message came through loud and clear. No one is happy with the social media companies, and no one is happy with the current legal and regulatory regime that governs them. Even for the first time, the social media companies themselves admitting that reform is now inevitable.
Well, in your opinion, are Facebook and Twitter doing enough to combat misinformation?
Well, I'm afraid their business model fundamentally rewards misinformation. Misinformation it's chewy, it's controversial. People that agree and disagree engage with it. And these are platforms that fundamentally rely on one thing. They want you scrolling down. They want you keeping yourself on the platform because that's how they keep your attention. And they keep serving you ads. 98% of Facebook's revenue comes from advertising. And that's how Mark Zuckerberg has made himself a centibillionaire worth $100 billion US. So as long as they can keep you on the platform, they will do so. And which content is most engaging? Actually, conspiracy theories are the most engaging of all. But things that get your blood boiling, the fight or flight reactions going. And that's why fundamentally, at the core, the business models are broken. The social media platforms know that as well. And I think that the case for reform, for exposing, first of all, to democratic accountability of the algorithms, but also the outcomes of those algorithms and what that's doing to our society is inevitable.
Well, some lawmakers worry that Facebook and Twitter are, quote, backsliding on moderating content. And they pointed to Georgia's runoff elections in January, which will decide which party gains control of the Senate. What exactly is the concern here, and how did Zuckerberg and Dorsey respond?
Well, the concern is that the very same people who were spreading misinformation in the November elections are still active on the platforms. And so, for example, one of the things that was mentioned in the hearing was the Stop the Steal Facebook group that was taken down after pressure from the center that I run. Alongside a lot of brave celebrities, Sarah Silverman, Josh Gad, Mark Ruffalo, and others who spoke out. But the people that ran that group have actually set up replacement groups, and they're still advertising Stop the Steal misinformation. They're still advertising their events. And that's the problem. They will still be around in the Georgia Senate elections, which are absolutely crucial to the future of the United States in the next few years. And so, as a result, no one can be happy with the situation as it lies right now.
Well, as we know, President Trump is very active on social media. Twitter and Facebook flagged some of his election-related posts for being false or misleading. What can we expect to see with regard to moderation practices after President Trump leaves office?
Well, I fear that nothing will change. If they think they've gotten away with it, that the small amount they did during the election itself, and having known for months in advance that this was what was going to happen. So the cheat by mail rhetoric had started in May, and we'd already identified it as being rampant in Facebook groups and on Twitter. We'd warned the platforms about it. We'd warned the political parties about it and said, look, this is a big issue for you. And of course, it ran all the way through. And taking a few small belated moves during the election itself, pretending that they had no idea that this was going to happen, that misinformation was some sort of surprise to them. When, of course, we know quite the contrary, given what happened in 2016, 2018, has been going on in our society at large over coronavirus, over vaccines, which were two critical issues that these platforms should be talking about that really weren't raised enough in this hearing and will be raised, I think, in the months going forwards, that the case for change is absolutely unanswerable. And we need a credible regime that holds them to their responsibilities.
Well, as we heard in the piece before you came on, both Republicans and Democrats want to reform laws that shield social media companies from legal responsibility for what people post on their platforms. Specifically, they're questioning the law known as Section 230. How does this law protect Facebook and Twitter, and what kinds of changes are lawmakers proposing?
Well, look, Section 230 is over 20 years old. It's part of the Communications Decency Act that was passed in the early days of the internet. And what it does now is it gives Facebook and Twitter absolute impunity from civil or criminal sanction for anything published on their website. And at the same time, it gives them a responsibility. It says that they should take the action necessary to moderate their platforms, and it protects them from any civil or criminal obligations when it comes to their moderation activity. So it's called the Good Samaritan Clause. The problem is the Good Samaritan is both greedy and lazy. And so what we have are these platforms in which they make endless profits and yet are unwilling to reinvest them back into proper moderation, and they're unwilling to open up their algorithms for democratic accountability to lawmakers, who, of course, are the voice of the people. And so this Section 230 protection, which has given these companies a chance to become beyond wealthy, and they admitted that themselves, that time is absolutely over. And the question now is not, will it go? The question is, what will replace it?
So are we likely, Imran, to see any meaningful change actually come to these platforms? We've heard Zuckerberg and Dorsey say that they're open to changes.
Well, the hope is that eventually some of those lawmakers, and I watched some of them today in bemusement, you'll be able to tell from my accent I'm not American, and so listening to some of them, I thought they were bananas, frankly, talking about how they'd been personally persecuted by Facebook and Twitter, when it's quite clear that the system is fundamentally broken. And the question of what's going to replace it, I think, is likely to be a regime that holds them to account when they fail to take due care as a platform to remove content that is truly dangerous. For example, the Steve Bannon posts about murdering two very senior civil servants, the FBI director and Dr. Anthony Fauci. In future, I think it would be much easier for those individuals to take action against the platform for that content, for putting themselves, their families and their loved ones at risk. But also when it comes to coronavirus and anti-vaccine misinformation, that puts all of us at risk in society. And I think the case for change, not just in the US, It's the UK, the European Union, all around the world, regulators and legislators have been saying we need to take action. The US has actually been blocking that action throughout the world, using its enormous economic power to do so. I don't think that will be true in future.
Well, here in the United States, where there has been such deep division, even when it comes to an agreed upon set of facts, certainly these platforms are going to receive increased scrutiny here in the months and years ahead. Imran Ahmed, thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure.